Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Violeta Seva from Makati City, Philippines. I work as senior advisor to the mayor of Makati City. What I'm going to present to you this morning is about the use of the Making Cities Resilient campaign tools. So these are my presentation objectives, which are the following. For a good appreciation of the application of internationally accepted simplified tools for assessing the level of resilience of a city using a multi-stakeholder approach. For purposes of identifying what the city has done, what are the gaps, and what are the interventions that need to be done to address these gaps. Secondly, of course, we'd like to you to understand, or we'd like to share with you how we use this all-of-society approach that we're trying to promote in building resilience of our communities. And finally, just to show you how we use these practical tools for purposes of measuring the level of progress of our city in terms of urban resilience. So Makati City was involved in the UNISDR Making Cities Resilient campaign since 2010. We all know that the Hyogo Framework of Action was passed in 2005, and this particular international framework has a time frame of 2005 up to 2015. And there was a realization that we need to localize it. So the UNISDR developed simple tools that mayors can use. One of them is the 10 Essentials Handbook. All right, so we produced this, and it tells the mayor what am I supposed to do to make my city resilient. So for example, number one would be make DRR as a priority for your city. Number two would be to understand risk and the rest. No? After that, a local government self-assessment tool was developed, and it's called the LGSAT, Local Government Self-Assessment Tool. It has about 48 indicators that you have to check whether, or answer whether you have done this particular actions to make your city resilient. So in 2011, we used this LGSAT tool, and from then on up to 2012, we continuously applied it every year. After that, a new tool was again developed. It's called the Scorecard. We utilize this. It's an improved version of the LGSAT. And then from 2014 up to 2015, a new tool. I'm sorry. This is this is the application of the Scorecard, together with the private sector and the government. After Sendai, Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction in 26, a new tool was again developed. It's now called the new Scorecard. It was just launched yesterday, and you can access it and make use of it in your cities. So this is the result of the local self-assessment of Makati City utilizing the LGSAT tool. So as we can see, there's an increase in the level of overall rating of these 10 essentials. And this is the process. It's not actually just the department heads that would rate themselves, but it has to be multi-sectoral. So we invite civil society representatives and the private sector. It involves a preparation phase where our local disaster risk management officers would identify who to invite, what critical data to research on, and then pre-test the tool before you do the actual workshops. The workshops normally would take just one day. And then after that, an analysis would take place where UNISDR Global Education and Training Institute experts would come to our city and guide us in our analysis. So this is also the result of the Resiliency Scorecard pre-test. It shows some of the weaknesses of our city. For instance, essential number 4, invest and maintain risk in reducing infrastructure, assessment of the safety of our schools and hospitals, and upgrade them as necessary, and enforcement of our building regulations, land use plans, and ensure education programs and trainings. So, as you can see, during that year, our stakeholders thought that, we're still not doing that much. And therefore, we have to do something about it. Okay? This is the private sector perspective. So if you will notice, there are certain parts there that are not answered. They say it's not applicable. So perhaps the people who attended the workshop are not really aware of what are the elements of disaster risk reduction. So the overall rating of the private and the public sector is 3.4. In the application of the now what we call the new scorecard, which was formerly named as the Local Urban Indicators Toolkit, we followed the same process: preparation phase, data capture phase, and then the analysis phase. All right, so these are some of the significant findings. For example, in essential number 1, organized for disaster resilience, a notable observation would be lack of historical disaster loss data at the local level. Number 2 would be risk assessment. They said that, okay, we already have risk assessment for earthquakes and floods, but what about the other risks? For risk financing, the finding is that there are no clear mechanisms for risk financing or risk transfer mechanisms. Essential number 6, for example, strengthen institutional capacity for resilience. The finding is that we need to forge partnerships with as many partners as possible. So for instance, if you're talking about response, we need to collaborate with the grocery owners, stores, those that will provide support in the aftermath of a major disaster. Understand and strengthen societal capacity for resilience. We're saying that, we still do not have any program for protecting our cultural heritage. So the city government is now doing the cultural mapping, and this particular activity is an offshoot of this finding. Early warning needs to be improved, and also our pre-disaster recovery plan and the PDNA or post-disaster needs assessment manual needs to be updated. So how did we integrate the SFDRR and made use of the assessment results in the DRM planning? Makati City has a disaster risk master plan. But this was produced prior to the SFDRR. So our stakeholders had to study what are the elements in the SFDRR that should be incorporated into the DRRM plan to keep it aligned with the targets and goals set up in the SFDRR. So this is now an example of how SFDRR is integrated. For outcome and sub-outcome, you can see here that we said that we need to increase the resilience of our existing infrastructure, and therefore your output would be retrofitted schools, for instance, or hospitals. So the indicators would be the presence of trained personnel for doing structural assessment, percentage of public infrastructure that are assessed and retrofitted. Now it's not. Hello? It's not working. The other step that the group accomplished is this assessment of the progress of the implementation of the DRRMP, because you really have to monitor whether the programs and projects that you set up in your disaster are accomplished, ongoing, or not accomplished at all. So this is an example of the outputs. For plans and policies that were identified as a result of the gap analysis, these are now the projects that were identified to be funded in succeeding years. What are the lessons learned? The availability of data and proper documentation of information are vital in applying assessment tools for purposes of development planning. So we're saying here that we lack good data. Number two would be the need for an all-of-society approach to do realistic assessment. And finally, that local government should be able to harmonize the utilization of all of these different kinds of tools that are being introduced to us.